Hi, I'm Adam from Watford Opinions, and I am here to talk about João Pedro's new contract extension. This season for us, João Pedro had 9 goals and 2 assists, and he played most matches. A couple times in the middle of the season, he found himself on the bench, but for the most part, he was a consistent starter, 9 goals and 2 assists. Considering he is only 19 years old and this was his first real full season in England, that output is very impressive. Admittedly, he did not have the strongest ends of the season in terms of finding the back of the net, but it still can't be overlooked that he is still a very young player. And the style of play of the championship, I mean, that's a word that's thrown around a lot, style of play. That phrase is thrown around quite a decent amount, but I think there is truth to be said that the championship, it's a more physical league. You're going to need to win the balls in the air a lot more. There's a lot more of a physical battle in the championship, whereas in the Premier League, again, Watford won't be having the ball as much. We won't be commanding possession as we did in the championship. But at the same time, the times Pedro gets the ball, it's likely to be at his feet. It's likely to play a bit more to his strengths when he's able to drop it and create for the wide players. So the style of the play of the Premier League will definitely benefit him. And back to the contract, the extension is now through 2027. His current deal was set to expire in 2025. So it wasn't as if we were re-signing Pedro because he was soon out of contract. I have to imagine that there's some sort of wage restructuring in this deal, probably a bit of a boost or maybe some bonuses added. But it's a very interesting contract, to say the least, because usually at Watford, there's sometimes 3, 4, 5-year contracts thrown around. But this expires in the summer of 2027. Pedro will be 26 years old at that point. 19 now, he'll be 26 years old when that expires. Now, will he be with us in 2027? Who knows? Probably not, considering the type of business we do and his upwards trajectory. As much as I'd love him to be here until 2027, there's a pretty good chance he does well and then moves on. Which, if he does well and then moves on to bigger things, then good for him, and that means he will have done well for us as well. But still, the Watford Observer were reporting that he had an English translator living with him to help him understand the language better and help him acclimate to the British lifestyle more. So that's definitely a good thing to see, and it definitely seems that Watford aren't going to make a Richarlison out of him in the sense that they're really going to try to keep him for as long as they can and as long as makes sense and as long as a truly undeniable transfer offer doesn't come in. They're not going to sell him for cheap. The difference with Richarlison, since he's joined Everton, Richarlison has done really well. The reason I compare Richarlison and Pedro is they're very similar players. Not that they're both Brazilian, but that they also both came from Fluminense. Pretty similar styles of play. So the whole thing with Richarlison was he'd scored 5 times in his first 12 matches with Watford, but in his last 26 Premier League matches, he did not score a single goal. And in his last 21 Premier League matches for Watford, and the 26 matches stat is for Watford as well, not overall. He's been doing well for Everton and consistently on the sheet, if you will. But he didn't even get a single goal contribution in his final 21 matches with Watford. So when an offer came in for £35 million, with the potential to rise for £50 million for Richarlison, that deal was just too good to turn down. Because yes, Richarlison, his value is likely to grow in the future, but such a hefty fee for a player who is still definitely a working project and not a final product, and definitely not really fitting what Watford were looking for, that was undeniable. But for Pedro, he can really test the time of different managers and different tactics, because when he broke into the Fluminense first team as an 18-year-old in Brazil, might have even been as a 17-year-old. He was playing as a center forward. There seems to be some sort of notion that Pedro, even though he did mostly play as a striker this year, is also a winger. Maybe that was just because that was where he came on the couple times he cameoed in the Premier League in the relegation campaign. But Pedro is a center forward. That's where he played for Fluminense, and so that's where he should play for us. That's where he'll be best. But he already has the physicality. The championship has only bettered that. And yes, the Premier League style of play will help him in the terms of getting the ball at his feet a bit more. But even then, if he's going to need to be physical, if he's going to need to do the dirty work, if something happens with Zisco and we go to a 2-striker formation, Pedro will be able to play in a 2-striker formation as well. So Pedro has a versatility, and he's not really going to have to depend on a certain style like Richarlison did in a way. So it's definitely great to see the contract until 2027. Yes, Pedro's goal-scoring form kind of dried up at the end of the season. He still had a beautiful assist to Dan Gosling against Norwich. But overall, it's a very good sign, and it's a good sign to see we really want him to be a player for the future. And that, yes, at the end of the day, football and recruitment, especially the South American youth recruitment, is mainly for Watford to make profit. That's just how it goes. We've seen it with Estupinian, we've seen it with Suarez, we've seen it with numerous other players, with Richarlison. But with Pedro, it definitely seems like there's going to be some sort of change in that philosophy. And again, if an undeniable offer comes in, Watford can't say no. But to tie him down for that long just definitely shows intent that we're going to really try to build around players like him. And not just him, because if he doesn't turn out to be our man in the next couple seasons, then, you know, we don't have to be bound to him. But still, to have him for the long term, in case he does well, is definitely a good sign. And it's definitely good he wants to stay, because if he really wanted to agitate for a move to bigger places, because Liverpool were interested in him when he was with Fluminense, before they kind of realized that we'd signed him, then he could probably agitate for a move. But it's great to see he's happy with us. It's great to see he's signed this new contract, and the Premier League will be exciting. Maybe he'll need a year to kind of work his way into things, and he won't find his footing super fast, but there is definitely a decent chance, especially after a successful championship campaign, that he'll hit the ground running, and he'll prove the bit of business to bring him in will prove to be even wiser than we once thought it was. But the new contract, great to see. There's definitely a lot of speculation regarding how well he can do in the Premier League and maybe whether we should bring in another striker. But regardless, Pedro, he should have an influence for us next year, and if not next year, definitely in the years after. And okay, he'll definitely have an influence for us next year, but depending if it's a prolific, grand, double-digit goal influence next year or in the years following, that remains to be seen. But he's definitely a player that should be held on to for the long term, and the little goal drought at the end of this season is definitely not something to worry about, and definitely not something that should have deterred Watford away from a new contract, which obviously it didn't. Thank you.